The cathedral looked dazzling. Hundreds of white orchids cascaded beautifully down marble columns. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the faces of 400 guests. My heart was racing in a good way. Pure joy rippled from my head to my toes. Julian stood at the altar looking dashing in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo. As his dark eyes locked on mine, I smiled. Even after 3 years together, I still made him nervous. I stood at the altar, looking into the eyes of Julian Montgomery, heir to the Titan corporate group fortune. My dreams were about to come true. Dearly beloved, Father Mackenzie began, his voice echoing through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Claire Elizabeth Collins and Julian Alexander Montgomery in holy matrimony. That's when Eleanor Montgomery rose from her seat in the front pew like an avenging angel in Chanel. I object. Her voice cut through the sacred silence like a blade through silk. I cannot allow this union to proceed. 400 people gasped in unison. The sound echoed off the cathedral walls like a small earthquake. I felt Julian's hands tighten around mine, but when I looked at his face, I saw something that made my blood turn cold. He wasn't surprised. He was nervous, like an actor waiting for his cue. Mrs. Montgomery, Father Mackenzie stammered, clearly rattled. Perhaps we should discuss this privately.
No.
Eleanor's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd built a corporate empire through sheer force of will. These people deserve to know what kind of woman they're being asked to celebrate today. She reached into her purse and pulled out a remote control. Suddenly, the massive screens we'd installed for our wedding slideshow flickered to life, but instead of romantic photos, they displayed bank statements and financial documents. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, the woman standing in that beautiful wedding dress is not only an adulteress who got pregnant for her lover, but also a thief. Claire Collins has been embezzling money from Horizon Capital while conducting a sordid affair that resulted in a pregnancy she terminated just 2 weeks ago. The cathedral exploded. Shouts of disbelief, gasps of horror, the sound of designer shoes scraping against marble as people rose from their seats to get a better look at the screens. I watched my father's face drain of all color as fabricated bank records showed hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing from Horizon Capital client accounts into what appeared to be my personal offshore accounts. That's impossible, I whispered, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The screens switched to text messages that looked exactly like they'd come from my phone. Intimate conversations with someone named David about stolen money funding our secret relationship. Messages discussing a pregnancy that had to be handled quietly before the wedding. Every word was perfectly crafted to destroy me. Then Sarah Davis, my maid of honor, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face.
Sarah.
My best friend since we were 7 years old. My roommate through 4 years at Wharton Business School. The woman who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress and plan every detail of this day. She was looking at me with such convincing heartbreak that for a moment, I almost believed I had done something wrong. I'm sorry, Claire. Sarah sobbed into the cathedral sound system, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine anguish. I can't watch you destroy Julian like this. I've been covering for you for months, hoping you'd come clean about the affair and pay back the money you stole. The screens now showed what appeared to be a sonogram image with my name on it, dated 3 weeks ago. Below, it was a medical record from an abortion clinic, also bearing my name and dated 2 weeks before the wedding. She was pregnant with her lover's child, Sarah continued, her sobs echoing through the stunned silence. She had the abortion in secret and planned to let Julian believe they were building a life together while she stole from the company and continued her affair. Julian finally spoke, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine devastation. Claire, please tell me this isn't true. Tell me there's some explanation for all of this. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 30 minutes, the man I'd shared my bed with for 2 years, the man who'd held me while I cried about my miscarriage just 2 weeks ago, the real miscarriage that had broken my heart. The screens now showed Eleanor standing beside a flip chart like she was giving a corporate presentation. The timeline is clear, she announced to the horrified congregation. Claire discovered she was pregnant 6 weeks ago. When she realized the father was her secret lover and not Julian, She began stealing money from Horizon Capital to pay for private abortion and fund her escape plan and live in luxury. She terminated the pregnancy 2 weeks ago and planned to disappear after the wedding with both her lover, our family's money, and investor funds. 400 of Manhattan's most powerful people were staring at me with disgust, horror, and pity. These weren't just wedding guests. They were clients, business partners, potential investors. My reputation, my career, my father's company, everything we'd built was being destroyed in real time. But as I stood there, watching the performance they'd orchestrated with such theatrical precision, I felt something that surprised me. Not heartbreak, not devastation, not the crushing humiliation they expected. I felt powerful. I smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a sad smile. Not the broken smile of a woman whose world was ending. I smiled like a predator who'd been waiting patiently for her prey to walk into the trap. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some information with our guests as well." I reached into my bouquet and pulled out my own remote control. Eleanor's evidence vanished from the screens, and her confident expression faltered just slightly. "You see, while you three have been planning this little performance, I've been doing some investigating of my own. And I think our guests deserve to see the real evidence." The screens flickered to life with security footage from Eleanor's own home office, time-stamped just 3 days ago. Crystal-clear video showed Eleanor sitting across from Sarah, coaching her on her tearful wedding day confession. Eleanor's voice filled the cathedral through the sound system. "Remember, you have to look heartbroken. You're betraying your best friend, but it's for Julian's own good. The abortion story will be the most damaging. Make sure you emphasize how Claire killed her lover's baby to cover up the affair." The congregation watched in stunned silence as the footage continued. Eleanor handing Sarah fake medical documents. Eleanor explaining how the embezzlement evidence had been fabricated. Eleanor discussing how they would time the accusations for maximum public humiliation. But the most devastating footage was yet to come. The screens now showed hallway security camera footage from Julian's apartment building, time-stamped from last month. Julian and Sarah in the elevator, her pressed against the wall, his mouth on her neck, her legs wrapped around his waist like they couldn't wait another second to get inside his apartment. The collective gasp from 400 people sounded like a hurricane hitting shore. Sarah's fake tears stopped immediately. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Julian looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "While you were accusing me of having an affair," I announced calmly, "Julian was having a very real affair with my maid of honor. And Eleanor, you knew about it. In fact, you orchestrated it." I clicked my remote again. New footage appeared, text messages between Eleanor and Sarah discussing the plan. "You see, Eleanor Montgomery didn't just discover Julian's affair with Sarah. She arranged it. She researched Sarah's background, learned about her jealousy and financial struggles, and recruited her to seduce my fiancé while gathering information about my personal life and business dealings." The screens now showed the most damning evidence of all. Hidden camera footage from Eleanor's home office, recorded just last week. Eleanor, Julian, and Sarah sitting around her antique conference table like a board of directors planning a corporate takeover. Eleanor's voice, clear and unmistakable. "The public humiliation has to be complete. Claire's reputation destroyed, Horizon Capital's stock price in free fall, and Arthur Collins so desperate to distance himself from the scandal that he'll sell the company for pennies on the dollar." Julian nodding eagerly. "And then Sarah and I can get married quietly once the heat dies down." Sarah laughing. "Claire always thought she was so much better than me. Tomorrow she'll learn what it feels like to lose everything." As their own words condemned them, I watched 3 people who had planned to destroy my life realize they had just destroyed their own. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "you've just witnessed a conspiracy to commit securities fraud, defamation, and attempted theft of a company. But that's not even the worst part." I smiled again, and this time it was genuinely warm, because the real surprise was about to begin. Before we continue, please say in the comments which country you are watching this video from. We love to know where our global family is tuning in from. Also, if this is your first time visiting this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge stories to life. Enjoy listening. You need to understand who I was before the story makes sense. My name is Claire Elizabeth Collins, and at 30 years old, I was living my dreams. I wasn't just any businesswoman. I was the vice president of operations at Horizon Capital, my father's $2.3 billion investment firm that had been built on a foundation of ethical investing and unwavering integrity. While other firms chased quick profits through questionable deals, we built lasting wealth by investing in companies that made the world better. My dedication to ethical business wasn't just professional philosophy, it was deeply personal. When I was 12 years old, my mother, Sarah Collins, died of ovarian cancer after a brutal 18-month battle that drained our family's emotional reserves and nearly bankrupted us despite my father's growing success. I spent those months watching the strongest woman I'd ever known waste away because the best treatments were too expensive, too experimental, or simply didn't exist yet. Standing in that sterile hospital room, holding my mother's hand as the machines finally went silent, I made a promise that would define the rest of my life. Arthur Collins might build wealth through smart investments, but Claire Collins would use that wealth to ensure other families didn't lose their mothers, their daughters, their futures to diseases we should be able to cure. That's why Horizon Capital wasn't just an investment firm, it was a force for medical advancement. Through our foundation, we'd funded breakthrough cancer research at 7 major hospitals, established scholarship programs for medical students from underprivileged backgrounds, and quietly donated millions to families struggling with medical bills. My personal passion project was a partnership with Children's Memorial Hospital, where we'd funded an entire pediatric oncology wing and subsidized treatments for over 200 families who couldn't afford care. Julian Alexander Montgomery seemed like everything I could want in a partner. 6'1" with dark hair and blue eyes that made him look like he belonged on magazine covers, Julian was the heir to Titan Corporate Group, a real estate and investment conglomerate that his family had built over 4 decades. When we met at a charity auction for the American Cancer Society, he bid $35,000 on a dinner with me, then told me he'd have paid twice that for the chance to meet the woman who's using Wall Street money to cure cancer. Our first date lasted 12 hours. Dinner at Le Bernardin turned into late-night coffee in Soho, which turned into watching the sunrise from his penthouse balcony overlooking the Hudson River. Julian listened to my stories about my mother with tears in his eyes, shared his own struggles with family expectations and corporate pressure, and promised me he wanted to be part of something bigger than just making money. 6 months later, Julian was quietly funding a new research lab at Sloan Kettering. A year after that, he proposed during a private dinner at the same restaurant where we'd met, getting down on one knee with my great-grandmother's diamond ring while telling me he wanted to spend his life supporting my mission to change the world. For 2 years, Julian Montgomery was everything I thought I wanted in a life partner. Supportive of my career, passionate about our foundation work, and completely integrated into my family's business and personal life. His mother, Eleanor, had welcomed me like the daughter she'd always wanted, involving me in family traditions and even offering business advice when I struggled with particularly challenging clients. But perfect men don't exist, and I should have recognized that Julian's charm was masking something much more dangerous. Eleanor Montgomery was the real power behind Titan Corporate Group, a brilliant and ruthless businesswoman who'd built the family empire through a combination of strategic brilliance and complete willingness to destroy anyone who stood in her way. At 57, she commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout Manhattan's business community. She was elegant, sophisticated, and utterly charming in social settings, which made her utterly terrifying in boardrooms where she systematically dismantled competitors. Eleanor had welcomed me into the Montgomery family with an enthusiasm that should have made me suspicious. She insisted I call her Mother Eleanor, invited me to join her exclusive charity committees, and spent hours discussing business strategy over private lunches at Manhattan's most expensive restaurants. She made me feel like I finally had the mother figure I'd lost so young, someone who understood the pressures of managing wealth and power while maintaining personal integrity. What I didn't understand was that Eleanor had been studying me, my family, and our business from the moment Julian brought me home. She recognized immediately that Horizon Capital was dramatically undervalued due to my father's conservative public profile and his focus on ethical investing rather than maximum profit extraction. While other firms our size were valued at 8 to 10 times their assets under management, we were operating at barely 3 times our assets because Arthur prioritized client results over spectacular quarterly earnings reports. Eleanor realized that Horizon Capital, properly leveraged and with more aggressive investment strategies, could be worth $20 billion rather than the $2.3 billion we currently managed. But my father would never sell, and any hostile takeover would trigger defensive measures that would make acquisition prohibitively expensive. She needed a scandal, something so devastating it would crater our stock price, destroy client confidence, and force Arthur to sell at a fraction of the company's true value. When Julian brought me home as his serious girlfriend, Eleanor saw her opportunity. She would use my own wedding day to orchestrate my complete public destruction, creating a scandal so comprehensive that it would achieve everything she needed while eliminating the one person who might interfere with her plans to transform Horizon Capital into the aggressive profit machine she envisioned. Eleanor's strategy required one more crucial element: someone close to me who could provide inside information and credible testimony about my supposed crimes. She found that person in Sarah Davis, my childhood best friend who harbored resentments I'd been too trusting to recognize. Sarah and I had been inseparable since we were 7 years old, growing up in the same wealthy Connecticut suburb, attending the same private schools, even rooming together through 4 years at Wharton Business School. While I'd inherited my father's investment firm and built it into something meaningful, Sarah had struggled to find her place in the world. She'd bounced between pharmaceutical sales jobs, always comparing her modest success to my growing influence in the financial world. What I didn't realize was that Sarah's admiration had gradually curdled into jealousy and resentment. She witnessed my relationship with Julian, a man she'd been attracted to from the moment I introduced them, and convinced herself that I didn't deserve the fairy tale life I'd been handed. Eleanor recognized Sarah's vulnerabilities immediately and spent months cultivating their relationship, positioning herself as the mentor and mother figure Sarah had always wanted. She convinced Sarah that Julian had only chosen me for business reasons, that he would be much happier with someone who truly understood and appreciated him. Eleanor promised Sarah that once I was out of the picture, Julian would finally see what had been in front of him all along. The final piece of Eleanor's plan was the cruelest. She would use my own pregnancy, the future child Julian and I had created together, as the weapon to destroy me. When I confided to Eleanor that Julian and I were expecting our first child, her eyes had lit up and she suggested we get married as soon as possible. 2 weeks before my wedding, I was sitting in Horizon Capital's glass-walled conference room, presenting quarterly earnings to our board of directors, when the cramping started. At first, I thought it was just nerves. Planning a wedding while managing a $2.3 billion portfolio tends to create stress. But when the sharp pain doubled me over during my presentation about our cancer research fund performance, I knew something was terribly wrong. "Claire, are you all right?" My father's voice seemed to come from very far away as I gripped the mahogany conference table, trying to breathe through another wave of agony. That's when I felt the warmth spreading down my thighs, and I looked down to see blood seeping through my cream-colored skirt onto the Italian leather chair. 8 weeks pregnant with Julian's child, and I was losing everything right there in front of 12 of Manhattan's most powerful investors. "Call an ambulance," I whispered, but my father was already on his phone, his face pale with the same terror I'd seen when my mother got sick. The ride to Mount Sinai felt like it lasted forever and no time at all. Julian met us at the emergency room, his face a mask of concern as he held my hand while doctors confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Our baby, the child Julian and I had planned, dreamed about, already loved so deeply, was gone. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Martinez said gently as the ultrasound screen showed only emptiness where our future should have been. "These things happen in early pregnancy. There's nothing you could have done differently." Julian squeezed my hand as tears streamed down my face. "We'll get through this together," he whispered against my hair. "We'll try again when you're ready. This doesn't change anything between us." His comfort felt genuine, his grief seemed real, his promises sounded sincere. If I hadn't been medicated and drowsy from the pain medication, I might have missed the tiny flicker of relief that crossed his features when he thought I wasn't looking. They kept me overnight for observation, and I drifted in and out of medicated sleep while Julian sat beside my bed, occasionally stroking my hair or adjusting my blankets. When Eleanor and Sarah arrived the next morning with flowers and devastated expressions, I felt grateful to have such a loving support system during the worst loss of my life. "Oh, darling," Eleanor whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead like my own mother used to do. "I'm so sorry." Julian called us immediately. "We've been praying for you all night." Sarah sat on the edge of my hospital bed, tears in her eyes as she took my hand. "Claire, I can't imagine what you're going through, but you're going to get through this. You're the strongest person I know." Their presence comforted me in ways I desperately needed. Julian's mother treating me like her own daughter, my best friend promising to support me through the grief. It felt like being wrapped in love during the darkest moment of my life. But then Sarah mentioned she needed to use the restroom, and Eleanor offered to walk with her to get coffee from the cafeteria. I felt drowsy from the meds and drifted halfway into sleep. Then I started hearing voices from the hallway outside my room. It sounded like a dream at first, but I recognized the voices clearly, because the hospital door was thin, and their voices carried clearly through the medication fog. The miscarriage went perfectly. Eleanor's voice was clinical, businesslike, completely different from the motherly concern she'd shown earlier. The drug Sarah slipped into her prenatal vitamins worked exactly as intended. No one will ever suspect anything except natural pregnancy loss. My blood turned to ice despite the warm blankets surrounding me. Drugs slipped into my prenatal vitamins. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach, now empty, while my mind struggled to process what I was hearing. Sarah's voice carried a note of excitement that made my skin crawl. "And my pregnancy is progressing perfectly. By the wedding day, I'll be far enough along that we can claim the timeline matches when Claire was pregnant. The fake sonogram will show my real baby, but everyone will think it was Claire's pregnancy with her mysterious lover." "Julian's playing his role beautifully," Eleanor continued with satisfaction. "He's been the perfect supportive fiancé, completely above suspicion. When we reveal Claire's fake affair and abortion at the wedding, no one will question why he's devastated and needs comfort from someone who truly understands him." The conversation continued, but I could barely hear over the roaring in my ears. They had murdered my baby. Eleanor, the woman I'd called mother, who'd welcomed me like the daughter she never had orchestrated the death of her own grandchild as part of a business plan. "Claire is vulnerable right now." Eleanor's voice grew colder, more calculating. "Grief makes people sloppy, less observant. She'll be so focused on healing from the loss that she won't notice us positioning all the pieces for her public destruction." "And the embezzlement evidence?" Sarah asked. "David's been working on that for months. The forged bank statements showing Claire stealing from Horizon Capital client accounts are perfect. Combined with your testimony about her affair and pregnancy, the financial crimes will seem like the natural progression of a woman spiraling out of control." I lay in that hospital bed, my body still aching from the miscarriage, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just planned to destroy my reputation, they had literally killed my unborn child as the foundation of their conspiracy. Pain was searing through my heart. I wanted to scream, but the sound got stuck in my throat before it came out. My head was spinning from the revelations. They aborted my baby because they wanted my dad's company. And as I lay numb on the hospital bed, wishing for the world to end, something shifted inside me. The pain transformed to a desire for revenge. I was going to make them pay for it. Sarah and Eleanor returned to my room wearing masks of concern and sympathy, fussing over my blankets and asking if I needed anything for the pain. My self-control, honed from years of difficult boardroom negotiations, kicked in. I forced myself to smile weakly and thank them for being such wonderful support during this difficult time, while every fiber of my being screamed at the injustice of having my child's murderers offering me comfort. When they finally said their goodbyes, promising to check on me the next day, I waited until Julian walked them outside. Then I made a phone call that would save my life and destroy theirs. Davidson Investigations, Marcus Webb speaking. "Mr. Webb, this is Claire Collins from Horizon Capital. I need to hire your best corporate espionage team, and I need them to start immediately. Someone just murdered my baby to steal my family's company, and I have 13 days to prove it. Marcus Webb had worked FBI white-collar crime for 15 years before starting his private investigation firm. When I explained what I suspected, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Miss Collins," he said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, you're not just dealing with wedding day betrayal. You're dealing with someone who's been operating a systematic criminal enterprise for decades. The fee for this kind of investigation." "Whatever it costs," I interrupted. "I want financial forensics, surveillance, background checks, forensic accounting on Titan Corporate Group, and criminal history investigations going back 20 years. I want everything." "Ma'am, that's a massive undertaking in less than 2 weeks." "Then you better get started. Because in 13 days, Eleanor Montgomery is planning to destroy my life in front of 400 witnesses. I intend to destroy hers first." The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, Manhattan's skyline glittering in the early October sunlight streaming through the windows of my childhood bedroom. I should have felt like a princess preparing for her fairy tale ending. But I was not. "Claire, honey, are you awake?" My father's voice carried through the door, accompanied by the smell of his famous Saturday morning pancakes. Even on my wedding day, Arthur Collins was maintaining our family traditions. The normalcy of it almost broke my heart. "Coming, Dad," I called back, slipping into my silk robe. This might be the last morning I ever spent in this house as his daughter instead of his business partner carrying the weight of everything we'd built together. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos. My bridesmaids had arrived early, chattering excitedly about hair appointments and last-minute dress fittings. Sarah moved through it all like she belonged there, fixing coffee and organizing schedules, playing the role of devoted best friend with Academy Award-worthy precision. "Morning, beautiful bride," Sarah beamed, handing me a perfectly crafted latte. "Triple shot vanilla, I know you'll need the energy today." I accepted the drink with a grateful smile, wondering if she'd poison this one too. "You're amazing, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." Her eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or satisfaction at how perfectly she was playing her part. "That's what best friends are for," she said, squeezing my hand. "To be there for all the big moments." The morning flew by in a carefully orchestrated dance. Hair and makeup appointments where Sarah fussed over every detail, insisting I looked absolutely radiant, while secretly documenting my appearance for whatever twisted purposes Eleanor had planned. Professional photos with my family, everyone laughing and posing while I memorized their faces, knowing this might be the last time they looked at me with uncomplicated love and pride. Then Eleanor arrived at 11 a.m. for our mother-daughter bonding session. "Darling Claire," she swept me into her signature Chanel-scented embrace. "You look absolutely luminous. Julian is the luckiest man alive." She brought gifts, a diamond tennis bracelet that had belonged to Julian's great-grandmother and a bottle of champagne. She insisted we open to toast the future Mrs. Montgomery. As we sipped Dom Perignon in my childhood living room, Eleanor chatted about wedding details and honeymoon plans, her voice warm with maternal affection. "Eleanor," I said during a lull in her monologue about European honeymoon destinations, "I want you to know how much your acceptance has meant to me. I never had the relationship with my own mother that I have with you." Her eyes softened with what looked like genuine emotion. "Oh, sweet girl. You are the daughter I always dreamed Julian would bring home. Today isn't just about you marrying my son, it's about you becoming my daughter." I smiled serenely and raised my champagne glass. "To family," I said. "To family," Eleanor echoed, clinking her glass against mine with perfect maternal warmth. 3 hours later, I was standing in the cathedral's bridal suite, surrounded by yards of Italian silk and French lace, while Sarah fastened the buttons on my custom Valentino gown. Through the stained-glass windows, I could see guests arriving. Manhattan's financial elite were gathered. "You look like a princess from a fairy tale," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes as she adjusted my cathedral-length veil. "Julian's going to cry when he sees you walking down that aisle." My father appeared in the doorway, distinguished and proud in his classic black tuxedo. "You are the most beautiful bride I've ever seen. Your mother would be so proud." This time, The tears in my eyes were real. "Are you ready?" Dad asked, offering his arm. I took one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked serene, confident, absolutely radiant. She looked like someone capable of anything. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. The cathedral doors opened, and I walked toward my future with 400 witnesses. I walked down the aisle feeling like I was floating on air. Inside, the cathedral looked perfect. The music was superb. Julian looked perfect standing at the altar in his black tuxedo with a white rose boutonniere. This looked like the perfect wedding scene from a movie, until everything came crashing down. I reached into my bouquet and pulled out my own remote control. The satisfied smirks on Eleanor's, Julian's, and Sarah's faces flickered with uncertainty as I held up the device like a weapon. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, my voice carrying through the cathedral's sound system with crystal clarity. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some information with our guests as well." I clicked my remote, and Eleanor's fabricated evidence vanished from the screens like it had never existed. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence. Then my own presentation began. The first image that filled the massive screens was time-stamped footage from Eleanor's home office, recorded just 5 days ago. Crystal clear video showed Eleanor sitting across from Sarah at her antique mahogany desk, but this wasn't the motherly mentor I thought I knew. This was a cold-eyed strategist coaching an actress for the performance of her life. Eleanor's voice filled the cathedral through the professional sound system. "Remember, Sarah, you have to look devastated when you confirm the affair. You're betraying your best friend, but it's for Julian's own good and for the greater good of business." The congregation watched in stunned silence as Eleanor handed Sarah what looked like medical documents. "The abortion story will be the most damaging. Make sure you emphasize how Claire terminated the pregnancy to cover up her adultery. The timeline has to match exactly, or people will start asking questions." But the most chilling moment came when Eleanor leaned forward conspiratorially. The prenatal vitamins worked perfectly. The miscarriage looked completely natural. Even the doctors didn't suspect anything. Sarah's voice, eager and excited. "And Claire never knew I was replacing her supplements with the ones you gave me. She trusted me completely." The cathedral erupted. 400 people gasped, screamed, and shouted in horror as they watched a grandmother casually discuss poisoning her son's pregnant fiancée. Several women in the congregation were openly weeping. Eleanor's face had gone from confident to chalk white in seconds. "That's fabricated," she screamed over the crowd noise. "Claire is desperate. She's doctored videos to save herself." I smiled and clicked my remote again. "Let's see what else is fabricated, shall we?" The screens switched to new footage, this time from Julian's apartment building hallway. The timestamp showed it was from 6 weeks ago, right around the time I'd been excitedly planning our future together, discussing baby names and nursery colors with the man on screen. Julian and Sarah were pressed against his apartment door, her legs wrapped around his waist, his mouth on her neck, both of them so desperate they couldn't even wait to get inside. Sarah's Maid of Honor dress from my bridal shower was pushed up around her thighs, and Julian's hands were everywhere as she moaned his name. The collective gasp from 400 people sounded like a hurricane hitting shore. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted from the back pews. Sarah's fake tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. She stumbled backward, nearly falling over her own bridesmaid dress. Julian looked like he'd been hit by a freight train, his face cycling through shock, panic, and something that looked almost like relief. "While you were accusing me of adultery," I announced calmly, "Julian was conducting a very real affair with my maid of honor. And Eleanor, you orchestrated the whole thing." I clicked again. New footage appeared. Eleanor meeting with Sarah at an upscale coffee shop, sliding her an envelope thick with cash, while leaning in close to whisper instructions. Eleanor's recorded voice filled the cathedral. "Julian is weak, but he's not stupid. You need to make him think the affair is his idea. Be available when Claire is working late. Sympathize with how much pressure he's under. Make him feel understood in ways his fiancée doesn't." The footage continued with Eleanor's clinical breakdown of psychological manipulation. "Once you're pregnant, we can use your real pregnancy as evidence of Claire's fictional affair. The medical records will be authentic because the baby is real. We'll just claim it belonged to Claire and her mystery lover." Julian finally found his voice, but it came out as a broken whisper. "Mother, what have you done?" "What I had to do to save our family," Eleanor snapped back, her composure finally cracking. "Titan Corporate Group is hemorrhaging money, and your gambling debts made everything worse. We needed Horizon Capital, and this was the only way." That admission hung in the air like a confession, and I seized the moment. "Speaking of Titan Corporate Group," I said pleasantly, clicking my remote again. "Let's talk about why Eleanor needed my family's companies so desperately." The screens lit up with financial documents that made several investment bankers in the congregation audibly gasp. Titan Corporate Group's real financial statements painted a picture of a company in complete free fall. Massive debts hidden through offshore shell companies. Fraudulent asset valuations inflating the company's apparent worth. Ponzi-style schemes where new investor money paid returns to existing clients while the actual investments failed catastrophically. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "Titan Corporate Group has exactly 4 months of operating capital remaining." They've been running a sophisticated financial fraud for over 2 years, using fake real estate valuations and non-existent properties to maintain the illusion of success. The most damning document appeared on screen, an internal email from Eleanor to her chief financial officer, dated just 3 weeks ago. "We need the Horizon acquisition by the end of Q2, or we'll be forced into bankruptcy." Eleanor's own words condemned her. The Collins scandal needs to be devastating enough to crash their stock price by at least 60%. At that valuation, we can acquire them for under $400 million and use their legitimate assets to cover our structural debt. I looked out at our wedding guests, Manhattan's financial elite who represented billions in investment capital, and watched their expressions transform from shock to disgust to absolute fury. Eleanor Montgomery wasn't just planning to humiliate me. I continued, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. She was planning to steal a $2.3 billion company by causing my miscarriage and destroying my reputation. This wasn't personal revenge. This was premeditated corporate theft. My father shot to his feet in the third pew, his face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. "Eleanor, you caused the loss of my grandchild for a business deal?" But I held up my hand before he could say more. "There's so much more you need to see." The screen switched to email chains between Eleanor and financial journalists at the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. Months of careful relationship building, strategic information leaks, and coordinated timing for the post-wedding media blitz that would destroy Horizon Capital's reputation. Subject: Claire Collins Insider Trading Investigation. I read aloud from one email. Eleanor wrote, "My sources indicate significant irregularities in Horizon Capital's client account management. Claire Collins appears to be using privileged information for personal gain. This could be the story that finally exposes the corruption in ethical investing firms." But the screens weren't finished revealing the scope of Eleanor's conspiracy. As the congregation watched in horror, new documents appeared showing a web of betrayal that extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined. "The conspiracy against my family involved people I trusted most," I announced, clicking to financial records that made several Horizon Capital clients gasp in recognition. "My own cousin, David Collins, has been stealing from our company while feeding inside information to the Montgomerys for 6 months." David's face appeared on screen in security footage from Horizon Capital's offices, copying client files after hours, photographing confidential documents, and meeting with Eleanor in parking garages to exchange envelopes thick with cash and information. David received $75,000 and a promise of senior vice president position at the merged company. I continued as bank records showed the payments. In exchange, he provided Eleanor with client account details, investment strategies, and advance notice of our major business decisions. The screen switched to recorded phone calls between David and Eleanor, his voice clear and unmistakable. "Claire suspects nothing. Arthur's completely focused on the wedding preparations. I've copied all the Q3 reports and the Cancer Research Foundation financials. When do you want to move forward with the acquisition?" David shot to his feet, trying to push past other guests toward the exit, but several large men in dark suits, definitely not typical wedding guests, blocked his path with calm authority. But David's betrayal was just the beginning. Julian's father, Richard Montgomery, has been equally complicit, I said as the screens showed email chains between Richard and editors at the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. He spent months cultivating relationships with financial journalists, feeding them false information about Horizon Capital's business practices and coordinating the media blitz that was scheduled to follow my public humiliation. Richard's recorded voice filled the cathedral. The Collins scandal needs to dominate financial news for at least 2 weeks. I've prepared talking points about the dangers of family-run investment firms and the need for regulatory oversight. By the time we're finished, no institutional investor will want to touch Horizon Capital. The most damaging evidence showed Richard meeting with 3 of Horizon Capital's largest clients over private dinners, subtly undermining Arthur's leadership while positioning Eleanor as the steady hand who could save the company from the Collins family's scandals. Richard Montgomery wasn't just supporting his wife's conspiracy, I announced. He was actively orchestrating the destruction of my father's reputation among the people who trusted him most. Eleanor was staring at the screens like she was watching her own execution, but I wasn't finished destroying her yet. But Eleanor Montgomery's crimes go far deeper than corporate theft and conspiracy, I said, clicking on documents that made the cathedral fall into complete, horrified silence. Eleanor has potentially been murdering husbands for money for over 20 years. The screens lit up with death certificates, insurance policies, and will modifications that painted a picture so chilling several guests began quietly moving toward the exits. Eleanor's first husband, Charles Whitman, had died in a tragic accident at 44, just 3 months after updating his will to leave Eleanor his pharmaceutical distribution company worth $12 million. The accident report showed he'd fallen down the stairs in their home after suffering what appeared to be a heart episode, but no autopsy had been performed due to Eleanor's grief and the family's desire for a quick burial. Her second husband, David Park, had suffered a massive heart attack at 46 while jogging in Central Park. No prior health issues, excellent physical condition, but he died instantly from what doctors called an unexplained cardiac event. He'd updated his will just 6 weeks earlier, leaving Eleanor his tech startup that she'd sold for $45 million within a year of his death. 2 healthy men in their 40s, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Both died within months of changing their wills to benefit Eleanor. Both deaths were ruled accidental or natural despite their suspicious timing. The screens now showed Eleanor's insurance claims following both deaths, policies she'd encouraged both men to increase just months before they died. Combined with the will inheritances, Eleanor had gained nearly $60 million from her first 2 marriages. Ladies and gentlemen, the burning question, Eleanor Montgomery also be a black widow? I will let the authorities investigate and answer that. Several women in the congregation were openly weeping now, and I could see security guards moving discreetly toward the exits to prevent anyone from leaving before federal agents could identify all the attendees. But my final revelation was the cruelest of all. Sarah's pregnancy timeline proves the most devastating aspect of their conspiracy, I said as medical records filled the screens. Sarah Davis is currently 12 weeks pregnant with Julian Montgomery's child. The affair timeline shows that Julian was sleeping with my supposed best friend during the exact period when I was carrying his child. The cathedral fell silent except for the sound of people gasping and crying. The medical records were undeniable. Sarah's pregnancy was real, the dates were precise, and the paternity test results showed Julian was the father. While I was planning our future together and nurturing Julian's child in my womb, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. Julian was impregnating my best friend as part of his mother's plan to steal my family's company. The screens showed the timeline in brutal detail. Sarah's first doctor visit occurred 2 weeks before my miscarriage. Eleanor's first meeting with pharmaceutical contacts to source miscarriage-inducing drugs occurred 3 days after Sarah's pregnancy was confirmed. The conspiracy hadn't just used my pregnancy against me. It had replaced my child with Sarah's as part of the evidence of my supposed infidelity. Sarah's pharmaceutical sales position gave her access to the controlled substances that killed my baby, I announced as the screens showed her security badge accessing restricted medication storage areas. She literally had the keys to the drugs that caused the passing of the child I wanted desperately, while she carried Julian's child as evidence of my fictional crimes. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably now, her hands pressed against her stomach protectively, finally understanding that she hadn't been a partner in Eleanor's conspiracy. She'd been a breeding tool whose pregnancy would be used as evidence regardless of what happened to her afterward. The full scope of Eleanor's plan was finally clear. Cause my miscarriage, use Sarah's child as evidence of my adultery, destroy Horizon Capital through a coordinated scandal, and acquire the company for a fraction of its worth while eliminating everyone who might interfere with her plans. Eleanor Montgomery hadn't just planned to destroy my life. She'd planned to destroy my family, my father's life's work, and the medical foundation that had saved hundreds of lives, all so she could profit from the pieces. Standing at that altar, surrounded by the evidence of the most sophisticated betrayal I'd ever encountered, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my mother died. Complete, focused clarity about exactly what needed to happen next. Eleanor was backing away from the altar now, her eyes darting around the cathedral like a cornered animal finally recognizing the trap. But there was nowhere to run, because I hadn't just exposed her conspiracy, I'd orchestrated her arrest. Eleanor Montgomery, Sarah Davis, Julian Montgomery, and David Collins, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system. You're all under arrest. That's when the magic happened. Throughout the congregation, men and women who'd been posing as wedding guests, family friends, and business associates stood up in perfect coordination, revealing FBI badges and weapons. They'd been scattered among the pews like pieces on a chessboard, and now they moved with the precision of a military operation. Federal agents. Agent Rebecca Torres announced from the front pew, her voice echoing off the cathedral walls. Nobody moves. Eleanor's face went from pale to gray as she realized the magnitude of the trap I'd set. 40 FBI agents had been sitting in on our wedding, listening to every word of her accusations, watching every piece of evidence I presented, witnessing her own recorded confessions to murder and conspiracy. Eleanor Montgomery, Agent Torres continued, approaching the altar with handcuffs ready, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Eleanor finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate scream. This is insane. Claire has fabricated all of this. She's having a mental breakdown. You can't possibly believe these lies. Ma'am, Agent Torres said calmly, we've been investigating your criminal enterprise for 3 months. Claire Collins has been working with federal law enforcement since discovering your conspiracy. Every piece of evidence presented today has been verified by forensic accountants, digital analysts, and medical examiners. The cathedral erupted as guests realized they'd been witnessing not just a wedding day confrontation, but a carefully orchestrated federal sting operation designed to gather evidence and testimony in front of hundreds of witnesses. Sarah was hyperventilating in her bridesmaid dress, finally understanding that she wasn't just losing her best friend. She was facing federal prison while pregnant with the child of a man who'd used her pregnancy as evidence in a murder conspiracy. Julian stood frozen beside me, his face cycling through shock, denial, and something that looked almost like relief. Claire, he whispered, I never knew about the drugs. I swear I didn't know Mother planned to hurt the baby. I looked at the man I'd been about to marry, the father of the child Eleanor had murdered, and felt nothing but contempt. You knew Sarah was pregnant with your child. You knew your mother was planning to use that pregnancy as evidence of my infidelity. You knew the wedding day accusations were planned in advance. Whether you knew about the specific drugs doesn't matter. You're complicit in using our dead child as evidence of crimes I didn't commit. Agent Torres was reading Eleanor her rights, but Eleanor wasn't listening. She was staring at me with a hatred so pure, it was almost admirable. You self-righteous little brat, Eleanor spat, her careful composure finally shattered completely. You think you've won something? I've been destroying people like you for 20 years. Your precious ethical investing, your cancer research foundation, your perfect little princess life. I would have burned it all down and used the ashes to build something actually profitable. Her confession was being recorded by the professional video crew I'd hired, broadcast live to thousands of viewers, and witnessed by 400 of Manhattan's most powerful people. Eleanor Montgomery had just admitted to decades of criminal conspiracy in front of everyone who mattered in the financial world. "Eleanor Montgomery," Agent Torres said quietly, "anything else you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Eleanor was beyond caring about legal consequences now. She made a desperate lunge toward me, her perfectly manicured nails reaching for my face like claws. "You destroyed everything. 20 years of planning. I would have made billions." Agent Torres tackled Eleanor to the marble floor right in front of the altar, handcuffing her as she screamed threats and curses that echoed through the cathedral like the wails of a demon being exorcised. Julian and Sarah were arrested without resistance, both of them too shocked and broken to fight as agents read them their rights. David Collins tried to run but made it exactly 12 steps before being tackled by agents who'd been positioned specifically to prevent escape attempts. Richard Montgomery rose from his seat in the front pew with his hands already raised in surrender. "I'll cooperate fully with your investigation," he announced loudly. "I have documents at home that prove Eleanor orchestrated everything. I was coerced into helping her, but I'll provide whatever evidence you need." As federal agents led the conspirators away in handcuffs, I addressed my wedding guests one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady despite everything that had just happened, "I apologize for turning what should have been a celebration into a federal crime scene. But Eleanor Montgomery's conspiracy threatened not just my life and my family's business. It threatened the financial security of every person and institution that trusted Horizon Capital with their investments." I looked out at the faces of clients, competitors, and colleagues who'd just witnessed the most sophisticated business conspiracy in decades. "The evidence you've seen today will be made available to federal prosecutors, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and appropriate regulatory bodies. Horizon Capital will cooperate fully with all investigations while continuing to serve our clients with the integrity and ethical standards my father built this company on." Father Mackenzie, who'd been standing in stunned silence throughout the entire confrontation, finally stepped forward. "In 40 years of performing wedding ceremonies," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like this. Claire, would you like me to?" "The wedding is canceled, Father," I said with the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. "I think I'll be taking some time to reconsider my taste in men." As Eleanor was dragged away, still screaming threats about destroying me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering the conspiracy: peace. The woman who'd caused me to lose my child, destroyed my trust, and tried to steal everything my family had built was finally going to face justice. The wedding that was supposed to destroy my life had become the stage for exposing one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies the FBI had ever investigated. Eleanor Montgomery thought she was ending my story. She had no idea she was helping me write a much better beginning. The arrests that unfolded at St. Patrick's Cathedral sent shockwaves through Manhattan's financial district before the federal agents had even finished processing the crime scene. Within 30 minutes of Eleanor Montgomery being dragged away in handcuffs, trading floors across Wall Street were buzzing with news of the most spectacular corporate conspiracy anyone had witnessed in decades. Titan Corporate Group's stock price began its death spiral at 3:47 p.m., just 2 hours after Eleanor's public confession to murder and fraud. By market close, the company had lost 59% of its value as investors fled in panic. Emergency trading halts couldn't stop the avalanche. When news broke that the company's financial statements were fraudulent and its founder was a confessed serial killer, institutional investors dumped their positions faster than the exchanges could process the orders. "This is unprecedented," CNBC's financial correspondent reported live from the New York Stock Exchange floor. "We're watching a major corporate empire collapse in real time based on crimes that were literally confessed on a live-streamed wedding ceremony. Titan Corporate Group may not survive the week." The Securities and Exchange Commission moved with lightning speed, freezing all Montgomery family assets before the sun set on my wedding day. Eleanor's personal accounts, Richard's investment portfolios, Julian's trust funds, and every shell company connected to Titan's fraudulent operations. Everything was locked down pending federal investigation. The family that had planned to steal billions found themselves unable to access a single dollar. Eleanor's carefully cultivated media relationships crumbled faster than her stock price. Financial journalists who'd been receiving her strategic leaks and coordinated talking points suddenly discovered urgent reasons to distance themselves from a woman who'd just confessed to murdering 2 husbands and poisoning her pregnant daughter-in-law. But David Collins's arrest triggered something even more devastating for Eleanor's legacy. Faced with federal charges for industrial espionage and fiduciary duty violations, David began cooperating with investigators within hours of being processed. What he revealed made the wedding day conspiracy look like amateur hour compared to Eleanor's decade-long criminal enterprise. David's detailed confession exposed a network of corrupt business associates, bribed officials, and compromised companies that stretched across multiple states and industries. Eleanor hadn't just targeted my family, she'd been running variations of the same scheme for years, using romantic relationships, family connections, and business partnerships to identify vulnerable companies and orchestrate their systematic destruction. Meanwhile, the financial world's response to my strategic brilliance exceeded every expectation I'd harbored during those desperate weeks of planning. By Monday morning, Horizon Capital's phones were ringing nonstop with new clients who wanted to invest with the woman who'd outmaneuvered a sophisticated criminal conspiracy while maintaining perfect composure under pressure. Claire Collins just demonstrated crisis management skills that business schools will be teaching for the next 50 years, Harvard Business School professor Margaret Chen told Bloomberg. She identified a complex threat, gathered evidence, coordinated with federal law enforcement, and executed a counter-strategy that protected her company while ensuring justice. That's not just impressive, that's legendary. Our existing clients didn't just maintain their investments, they increased them dramatically. Within 3 days of the arrests, Horizon Capital had received over $400 million in new commitments from investors who wanted to work with someone who'd proven capable of protecting their assets under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The medical community's reaction was equally swift and decisive. When news broke that Eleanor had sourced pharmaceutical drugs to induce my miscarriage, medical authorities launched immediate investigations into controlled substance security at hospitals and research facilities across the country. Sarah's pharmaceutical access had exposed vulnerabilities that nobody had considered before. The possibility that sales representatives could steal dangerous medications for criminal purposes. The FBI's investigation expanded exponentially as Eleanor's pattern of targeting wealthy families became clear. Federal agents identified at least 12 other families who'd experienced suspicious deaths, sudden business reversals, or unexplained financial difficulties after encountering Eleanor or her associates. 3 additional widows came forward with stories eerily similar to Eleanor's previous marriages, husbands who died unexpectedly after updating their wills, insurance payouts that had funded Eleanor's business empire, and circumstantial evidence of poisoning that had never been investigated. Eleanor Montgomery appears to have been operating a systematic criminal enterprise designed to identify, infiltrate, and financially exploit wealthy families through orchestrated tragedies, FBI Director Sarah Williams announced at a press conference. We're now investigating her potential involvement in suspicious deaths dating back 25 years. Sarah Davis's arrest revealed criminal activity that extended far beyond her role in Eleanor's conspiracy. When pharmaceutical investigators examined her employment records and facility access logs, they discovered she'd been systematically stealing controlled substances for over 2 years. The drugs she'd used to murder my baby were just a small fraction of the medications she'd diverted from their legitimate medical purposes. Ms. Davis had been operating a sophisticated theft ring involving multiple pharmaceutical facilities and at least 6 other sales representatives, DEA spokesperson Michael Rodriguez explained to reporters. The controlled substances she stole included powerful heart medications, experimental cancer drugs, and pregnancy-terminating compounds that she was distributing through dark web networks. Sarah's pharmaceutical theft operation had been generating over $50,000 per month in illegal profits, money she'd been using to fund her lifestyle while working to seduce Julian and destroy Mai. The woman I trusted as my maid of honor had been running a criminal enterprise that put thousands of patients at risk by diverting life-saving medications from legitimate medical use. Julian's arrest uncovered additional motives that made Eleanor's manipulation even more calculated than I'd realized. Financial investigators discovered that Julian had accumulated over $2 million in gambling debts through high-stakes poker games and cryptocurrency speculation. Eleanor had been covering his losses for months, while using his desperation as leverage to ensure his cooperation in the conspiracy against my family. Julian Montgomery wasn't just a weak man following his mother's orders, federal prosecutor Amanda Richardson explained during his arraignment. He was facing financial ruin and potential violence from creditors. Eleanor offered him a way out through marriage to Claire Collins and eventual control of Horizon Capital. His participation wasn't just family loyalty, it was financial survival. The gambling debts explained Julian's enthusiastic participation in Eleanor's seduction of Sarah and his willingness to use our dead child as evidence of my fictional crimes. He hadn't just been manipulated by his mother, he'd been desperate enough to participate in infanticide for money. Richard Montgomery's immediate cooperation with federal investigators earned him a reduced sentence recommendation, but it also revealed the true scope of Eleanor's media manipulation campaign. Richard provided prosecutors with detailed records of his payments to journalists, editors, and media influencers who'd been prepared to amplify the post-wedding scandal that would have destroyed Horizon Capital's reputation. The media attack was designed to last for months, Richard confessed during his plea hearing. Eleanor had prepared follow-up stories, anonymous tips to regulatory agencies, and coordinated social media campaigns designed to ensure Claire Collins and Arthur Collins remained in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. His cooperation also revealed Eleanor's backup plans in case the wedding day attack failed. She'd prepared evidence suggesting that I was mentally unstable, that my father was developing dementia, and that Horizon Capital was being mismanaged by a dysfunctional family incapable of handling fiduciary responsibilities. Eleanor had contingencies for every possible outcome except the one that actually occurred, her complete and total destruction at the hands of the woman she'd underestimated so catastrophically. As the full scope of Eleanor's criminal enterprise became clear, I realized that stopping her hadn't just saved my family's company or avenged my murdered child. It had potentially saved dozens of other families from the same systematic destruction that Eleanor had been perfecting for decades. The woman who'd called me daughter while planning to murder my baby had been operating one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in American business history. And I'd brought it all crashing down using nothing but careful planning, strategic thinking, and the same ethical principles she'd dismissed as weakness. Eleanor Montgomery thought she was ending my story. Instead, she'd given me the platform to become a legend. The courtroom was packed with financial reporters and Horizon Capital clients when Eleanor Montgomery received her sentence. 10 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for manslaughter, conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, and RICO violations. As the judge read the verdict, Eleanor's eyes found mine across the crowded room. The hatred there was pure and absolute, but it couldn't touch me anymore. The woman who'd murdered my child for money would spend the rest of her meaningful life behind bars. Julian got 7 years, though he'd serve only 4 with good behavior. During his sentencing hearing, he finally broke down completely, sobbing about how his mother had manipulated him and how sorry he was for everything. The pathetic display might have moved me once, but all I felt was cold satisfaction. He'd chosen to betray me when our child was still growing inside me. His tears couldn't resurrect the future we'd murdered together. Sarah received just 3 months due to her cooperation with federal investigators, but her real punishment was different. She'd lost her pharmaceutical license permanently, her career was destroyed, and she was raising Julian's daughter alone while working minimum-wage jobs to survive. The woman who'd poisoned my supplements while pretending to be my best friend had learned that betrayal carries consequences that last far longer than prison sentences. David Collins got 2 years, but his cooperation led to the expansion of the federal investigation into corporate espionage networks across 6 states. My cousin had thought he was making a smart business deal. Instead, he'd helped expose one of the largest financial conspiracy rings in FBI history. Even Richard Montgomery faced justice. His cooperation earned him probation instead of prison time, but He forfeited every asset he'd accumulated through Eleanor's criminal enterprises. The man who'd been planning to profit from my public humiliation ended up losing his penthouse, his art collection, and his reputation in Manhattan's business community. But watching my enemies face consequences was nothing compared to what I built from the ashes of their betrayal. 6 months after the arrests, my father officially retired, handing control of Horizon Capital to me at 31 years old. I became the youngest female CEO of a major investment firm in New York history, and I was determined to prove that Eleanor's assessment of our company's potential had been absolutely correct, just not in the way she'd planned. Under my leadership, Horizon Capital exploded. The scandal that was supposed to destroy us instead became proof of our integrity and crisis management capabilities. Investors flocked to work with the woman who'd systematically dismantled a criminal conspiracy while maintaining perfect composure under pressure. Within 2 years, we'd tripled our assets under management, growing from $2.3 billion to over $7 billion. I expanded internationally, opening offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore, but I never abandoned the ethical investing principles my father had built the company on. If anything, Eleanor's betrayal had reinforced my commitment to using wealth responsibly. Every successful quarter meant more funding for cancer research, more scholarships for underprivileged medical students, more families getting treatment they couldn't otherwise afford. The recognition came quickly. Forbes featured me on their cover as the CEO who turned betrayal into billions. Fortune included me in their 40 Under 40 list of business leaders reshaping American capitalism. Harvard Business Review published my analysis of crisis leadership, which became required reading in MBA programs across the country. But the achievement that meant the most came 18 months after the wedding day arrests. The National Cancer Institute awarded our foundation federal recognition for breakthrough funding that had directly led to 3 new treatment protocols and over 400 lives saved. Standing at that podium, accepting the award in my mother's memory, I finally felt like the pain of losing my child had been transformed into something meaningful. Personal healing was harder than professional success. I joined a support group for victims of intimate partner violence, sitting in circles with women who'd survived abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. Learning to process the trauma of having people I'd loved orchestrate my unborn child's death required more strength than dismantling Eleanor's conspiracy had demanded. Therapy twice a week with Dr. Amanda Richardson helped me understand that Eleanor's betrayal hadn't been about my weaknesses. It had been about her complete lack of humanity. The woman who'd called me daughter while planning to murder my grandchild wasn't someone whose opinion of me mattered. She was a predator who'd spent decades perfecting the art of exploiting trust for profit. But rebuilding my ability to trust others remained an ongoing struggle. I threw myself into work, managing portfolios worth billions while avoiding personal relationships that required emotional vulnerability. Colleagues respected my professional brilliance, but they also noticed that Claire Collins had become someone who kept everyone at careful distance. The legend grew larger than the woman living it. Financial journalists called me the Ice Queen of Wall Street. Brilliant, successful, and completely untouchable. They weren't wrong. Eleanor's betrayal had taught me that the people closest to you could be the most dangerous, and I'd learned that lesson too well to forget it easily. But success built on isolation wasn't the victory I'd thought it would be. Standing in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, managing billions of dollars in assets while eating dinner alone most nights, I wondered if Eleanor had won something after all. She'd wanted to destroy my capacity for trust and love, and in some ways, she'd succeeded. That's when I realized that true revenge wouldn't just be professional success. It would be learning to trust again, to love again, to build relationships that honored my mother's memory and my lost child's potential. Eleanor had tried to make me into someone cold and calculating. My real victory would be remaining someone capable of warmth and connection despite everything she'd taken from me. 1 year after the wedding day that changed everything, I stood at the podium of the National Women in Finance Conference, looking out at an audience of 3,000 professionals who'd come to hear about crisis leadership and strategic decision-making under pressure. The betrayal that was designed to destroy me became the foundation of everything I built afterward. I told them, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. Eleanor Montgomery's conspiracy taught me that your greatest strength isn't avoiding difficult situations. It's having the clarity and courage to respond strategically when someone tries to destroy everything you've worked for. The presentation had become legendary in business circles. Harvard Business School used the wedding day footage as a case study in crisis management. Stanford's Graduate School of Business included Eleanor's conspiracy in their curriculum about corporate espionage and hostile takeovers. The woman who'd planned to use my public humiliation as a business acquisition tool had instead given me the platform to become one of the most respected voices in American finance. But as I finished my speech and prepared for the networking reception, I felt the familiar emptiness that success couldn't quite fill. Professional triumph was satisfying, but it couldn't replace the relationships Eleanor had destroyed along with my ability to fully trust again. That's when I saw him in the third row, applauding with the rest of the audience, but looking at me with an expression I recognized from childhood. Daniel Green had grown up in our house after his parents died, becoming the brother I'd never had and the closest friend I'd ever known. Until I'd ended our friendship 3 years ago because he tried to warn me about Julian Montgomery. Daniel had become everything I'd always known he could be. His technology company, Green Innovations, was worth over $100 million, making him one of Silicon Valley's most successful young entrepreneurs. But more importantly, he was the one person who'd seen through Julian's charm and Eleanor's manipulation from the beginning. The friend I'd rejected for telling me truths I wasn't ready to hear. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel approached me with the same careful smile he'd worn as a 12-year-old boy grieving his parents in our family kitchen. "That was incredible, Claire," he said simply. "You've become everything I always knew you could be, even when you couldn't see it yourself." For the first time in months, I felt tears threatening. "Daniel, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You tried to warn me about Julian, and I was too proud and too blind to listen. You were protecting me, and I threw away our friendship because I couldn't handle hearing the truth." "You don't owe me anything," he replied, and I could hear the boy who'd comforted me after nightmares in his gentle tone. "You survived something that would have destroyed most people, and you turned it into a source of strength that's helping thousands of others. That kind of resilience can't be taught. It comes from who you are at your core." We talked until the hotel lobby emptied around us, catching up on the years we'd lost and carefully rebuilding the foundation of trust that had made us inseparable as children. Daniel didn't push for more than friendship, didn't try to rush past the walls I'd built to protect myself. He understood that Eleanor's betrayal had left scars that would take time to heal, and he was willing to be patient while I learned to trust again. The miscarriage that was supposed to break me became the catalyst that made me stronger, I told him as we stood in the hotel lobby at midnight, both of us reluctant to end a conversation that felt like coming home. Eleanor thought she was ending my story. She had no idea she was helping me write a better beginning. Daniel smiled, and for the first time since the wedding day arrests, I felt something other than professional satisfaction. I felt a warmth in my heart, and also hope. Hope that the walls I'd built to protect myself didn't have to be permanent. Hope that the future could include trust and love and partnership with someone who'd known me before I became the legend, someone who'd loved the woman beneath the success. Eleanor Montgomery had tried to destroy my capacity for happiness along with my reputation and my family's business. But looking into Daniel's eyes that had seen me at my most vulnerable and loved me anyway, I realized that I could trust again, love again, build something beautiful from the ashes of everything she'd tried to burn down. The wedding that was meant to be my ending was becoming the opening chapter of a story Eleanor could never have imagined. A story where the woman she'd underestimated so catastrophically would find not just professional success, but personal healing and the possibility of a love built on complete honesty and unwavering support. I was ready to write that story. And this time, I'd be the only one holding the pen.
So what do you think?
If you were in Claire's position, would you have done anything differently? Would you have exposed Eleanor's conspiracy at the wedding, or would you have handled it another way? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these epic revenge stories. And if you enjoyed watching Claire turn the tables on the people who betrayed her most, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you the most incredible revenge tales every week, stories of people who refused to be victims and fought back against those who tried to destroy them. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.